When you were talking about forgiveness, could you go more in depth with the turn the other cheek verse? I'm curious. Okay, so there are two different schools of thought out there on what Jesus was saying when he said, if someone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other as well. And I ardently reject one of those, but I'm going to go over both of them with you so that you can make this decision for yourself. So the one that I hold to, just being honest, is the humility/forgiveness interpretation. In this, the core idea is that Jesus is teaching voluntary restraint and non-retaliation. What are the pros? Well, first off, it fits the surrounding Sermon on the Mount context. It's surrounded by teachings on meekness, like in chapter 5, verse 5, and loving enemies in verse 44, and peacemaking in verse 9. It's also consistent with Jesus' own behavior. Jesus did not mock or retaliate when struck, or even when he was crucified. Look at Isaiah 53:1 or 1 Peter 2:23. This idea that he's trying to teach us is also reinforced elsewhere in the New Testament, like Romans 12:17 through 21, 1 Corinthians 6:7, 1 Peter 3:9. They all hit on non-retaliation. It's also emphasizing an inward transformation. It focuses on conquering of ourselves. As he says, we must die to ourselves. We must follow him, take up our cross. And lastly, this is also held by the majority of the church fathers, like Tertullian and Origen as a couple examples. Now, critics do argue that it focuses on personal virtue rather than social change, and they also notice that it kind of contradicts human instincts. It's counterintuitive, but it's not the only time Jesus was counterintuitive, let's be honest. Let's talk about the other view, which is the equal treatment or nonviolent resistance. So the core idea is that Jesus is referring to an insulting backhand slap. Turning the other cheek forces the aggressor to treat you as an equal rather than a subordinate. So what they generally bring up is, in the first century Judea, a right-handed backslap was an insult, not a fight. Okay, no argument there. And this avoids portraying Jesus as endorsing passivity. They see standing up for yourself as a virtue. And to their credit, this does actually resonate with Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr., a passive resistance. But their argument is built a lot on human dignity. But here's the problems. First off, it relies heavily on a speculative reconstruction. The text itself does not explain the gesture or its social meaning. They're taking some ideas and running a long distance with them. We have to look at the context of the passage, in which he mentions forgiveness and submission a lot. Never once does he say, get in their face and declare that you must be treated equal. That's more of a prideful teaching. It applies mainly to the specific example, but it struggles to explain the giving of your cloak or going the second mile. And while some of the people who teach this demanding of equality thing, while they do, some of them go into those, it's never a cohesive argument because it still neglects the rest of the context of the entire passage. Otherwise, why are we told to count it all joy when we suffer various trials? The biggest issue is that Jesus is dealing with morals, not ethics. He's not trying to get us to craft ourselves into a better representation of humanity. He's showing us that we are sinful and that we need to have a radical love and forgiveness for others. That alone is what's going to bring people to salvation. Demanding equality will never save a single soul. The entirety of the Sermon on the Mount is all about heart transformation, about being like the kingdom of God. And where in the kingdom of God are you supposed to demand to be treated equal? It is our humility that saves us. It is our faith, trusting God to do the work for us. And it's very much reflected in this passage. When Paul talks about how Christians were suing each other, he doesn't say demand that they treat you equally. He doesn't even say stand up for yourself. He says, why not suffer loss? Because then you will gain your brother. We are to submit to one another, humbly, like Jesus did when washing the disciples' feet. It's very important to look at the context of everything Jesus taught before we try to look for an excuse to be belligerent to those around us.